Can the power of 2 inspire a dress? Let's find out. So for this week's math-inspired video, I wanted to think about the power of 2 and specifically doubling something. So let's say you took 2 items and then you wanted to double each of those. So then you got 4 items and then you double that again, so you get 8 items. This pattern can continue on forever. So you would get 2 to the first, 2 to the second, 2 to the third, and where we start to get into exponents. But how could we relate this to an outfit where you get like 2 to the n? So what I did was I wanted this to be a scrap dress. This was actually an idea my mom had. So I used 2 lighter color pieces of fabric, then 4 darker color green pieces of fabric, then 8 pieces, then I was going to cut out 16 pieces, and then finally 32 pieces of fabric. Now since this was cutting out so much fabric, I did opt to use a rotary cutter this time to cut out each of those squares. For the purple, I did 5-inch squares, then I continued this pattern. So for the indigo, this was then a 6-inch square, and then for that light blue, I did a 7-inch square. So the squares would technically be getting bigger as you went up the dress. In addition, I did make my own pattern for the bodice using kind of a masking tape method so I could get the shape. And I cut out 4 different pieces for the dark green, as well as those 2 pieces for the light green. So here's my final collection of fabric that I had cut out for the bottom of the dress. You can see that I had the purple, the dark blue, and the light blue. So what it was time to do now was take each of these squares and match them with right sides together and pin them up along one edge so that I would be able to take a straight seam. Once I did this, I was then time to take that seam. I did use a chain stitching method similar to how you would in quilting so that it would make it much faster to go through the sewing process as well as use less thread. This resulted in me having one very long chain of squares that then I had to separate. And to do that, I just took my scissors and cut through each square so that I could separate them out. Once this was done, I then had to go through and press each seam open so that it would be nice and smooth and flat. Once I had them pressed, I then continued with the process of matching the squares together, taking a seam until I got those long strands of squares like I was looking for. At this point, now I was able to start working on the gathering stitches, which is where I took a basting stitch and then a regular stitch for each of those rows of fabric so that I would be able to match them up to the correct sizing for my skirt. So to make sure that it would actually match with the top bodice, I had to ensure that that first strip was about 33 inches. So I pulled one thread. The cat also decided that she wanted to just supervise for this video, so she's just over there. But again, I pulled one thread of the basting stitch all the way through the long strips of fabric to get them to match up for the measurements. And I continued this for each strip. Once it was at the correct measurement, I then went back through and took a straight seam all the way across to hold that gathering stitch in place. And I repeated this for each of those strips of fabric. Now I set the skirt aside as I had mostly done what I needed to with it, and it was time to start working on the bodice. So when I cut this out, I did also cut out a lining piece. That way at the end it would look a lot neater. And what I did was I matched up the dark green pieces together with right sides together as well as the light green pieces. And I sewed the outside of the bodice as well as the lining of the bodice. So I did the exact same stitches and then I pressed everything open so that it would lay nice and flat. Once they were pressed, I matched with right sides together, the dark green and the light green, so I could take that seam along the bottom to sew those pieces together, and I repeated this for the lining fabric as well. So I'm just going to take a straight seam all the way across. So now that I have both the front as well as the lining completed, it is time to actually sew these together. For this, I'm going to pin all the way along the outside of the top. This is a halter top, so I'm going to have some very long strands I'll be tying together, and I'll complete this all the way to the other side. I am going to leave the bottom portion open so that I'm able to turn this right side out and we'll be able to attach it to the skirt at the end. Now pinning this did take some time as there was so much to it, but it made it a lot easier to take that seam. Now with the seam complete, I could go through, trim up all those extra threads, take them off, and then turn this right side out. Then it was time to press this so it would lay nice and flat. so that I'd be able to attach the back, which was 2 more dark green pieces of fabric, to the entire bodice, so that we would now have one completed bodice look, and all we would need to do is to add some sort of ties at the end. So with my idea, I'm going to actually be adding a zipper later on. So I forgot to record this, but I did sew those 3 strips of fabric together for our skirt, but now it was time to sew our bodice to our skirt portion so we could have a full dress. So I combined with right sides together, the top and the bottom, and just took that straight seam across so that I now had one piece of fabric, or one dress portion. So now all I needed to do was to finish up the bottom of the skirt and then add the zipper so that it would have that finished closure. So in preparation for the zipper, I did pin the bottom of my skirt so that I would be able to take a straight seam to close that off. I figured out how much measurement I wanted, and then I was going to take a seam directly down that skirt so that it would not be flying open the whole time, since my zipper was not that long. Once I did that, I did press everything again just to make sure it all laid nice and flat, as I wanted to make sure it'd be very easy to add the zipper. So I opted to use this really nice blue zipper that matched the blue stripe of fabric at the bottom of the dress. And to add the zipper, what I did was I folded over the outside as well as the lining of the bodice of the fabric so that there wouldn't be any raw edges. And then I pinned the zipper to this new folded in, almost like pocket. And then I'm just going to take a seam all the way around to add the zipper. Once the zipper was in, the last step was to top stitch all the way around the bodice of the dress so that all the green would lay nice and flat. And here is the completed product. I absolutely love how it turned out. It has a really fun rainbow design, from the light green to the dark green to the blues and purples. The back has that nice halter. I did end up adding a ribbon, as I had this fit myself and I'm smaller than my dress form, but the zipper did turn out really well with it too. I think this is a really fun summer dress that you could wear like a shirt underneath, or you could wear it as it is. If you like this video and you want to see more, be sure to like and subscribe.